morning and welcome to Planet in the Word. And if you have been reading through the Bible chronologically with us, this week you will be in your second week of the New Testament, and we are at week 41. And it's great to finally be getting a little bit of Jesus in what we're reading, because we've been doing a lot of setup and preparation across Scripture, and now we have finally arrived. And one of the things that I'd like to talk about this week is that your reading plan is designed so that you are reading all four versions in the Gospels of what is happening, usually focused upon one event, so that you're reading it from all of the four perspectives. And one of the things that I'd like to draw your attention to this week is the intentionality of Jesus at this point of his ministry to focus in on the law. And what I really would like you to look for as you read this week is how he seems to be turning the law on its head. Now, that might not be exactly worded the way it theologically should be, but the point is the same. Jesus, as the lawgiver, as part of Yahweh, is fully cognizant of what the law states. And so then we have the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the scribes, all these learned men that have spent their lives studying law with the intent of being the most righteous and checking the boxes of behavior. And Jesus, immediately at the beginning of his ministry, starts changing that and inverting it. God's economy is so different than our human economy. And I think this is really the point where Jesus starts to lay the foundation for, these are the ways you do things, but this is what I want to focus on now. This is what the law states. This is what I want you to do. So for example, when we start in Matthew and Jesus starts focusing in on the heart behind the matter, he seems to be changing the economy over from checking the box of behavior to the motivation behind it. For example, the Pharisees and all the learned leaders of that time, and like humanity in general, they really were all about honor. They were about position. They were about authority. They were about all the things that seemed to bring them up in righteousness. They fasted, they tithed, all the behaviors that they did to say, look, we are the most righteous men. And yet Jesus comes along and he starts honoring the peacemaker, the merciful, those that are willing to work behind the scenes. He really is saying those are the people that are going to be blessed. And he starts to change this viewpoint over, and this draws people to him. He's now beginning to focus on not the law, but the heart behind the law. In fact, you'll begin reading this week in Matthew where he starts talking about, I know you have heard it said, but I would say to you, one of the ones he quoted is, I know that you have heard it said that you are to love your neighbor and hate your enemies. But I'm going to tell you, I need you to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And he starts to focus in on, this is what you've been taught, but this is what I want you to do. He begins to say, look, anybody can love their neighbor. What's the hard part about loving somebody who loves you back? I tell you, the reward comes if you can love someone well who doesn't treat you well, who doesn't love you back. And he begins to do this huge paradigm shift, which makes those that have self-righteousness exceedingly uncomfortable. And then we get all the way into Mark 3. And in Mark 3, he seems to point to the things that they have done as Jews. For example, he starts to lay out, look, you care about keeping the Sabbath more than you care about compassion on people. And another thing he addresses is that the Jews, as a matter of principle, poorly esteemed anyone who was not Jewish, any goyim, any Gentile among them, which would of course have included the Roman conquerors as they were governmentally over all of Israel. The Jews hated that, and they would not give them the time of day. But Jesus modeled compassion for those. He heals Gentiles quite often through our New Testament. He even heals the slave of the Roman centurion that comes to him. And so Jesus is addressing, and this is what I'd like you to pay attention to, the juxtaposition that Jesus is doing over and over from the Gospels for, this is the way you've been doing it, but this is how I want you to do it. And we're really getting an introduction to the principles that Paul and the letter writers and John and Peter, after Christ is removed from earth, this is the foundation of Christianity that he's laying that is completely different and new. But he's laying that foundation so that when he fulfills his requirements on earth and pathways to God are now being made available, those that are beginning to follow him as this new Christian group understand that God's economy and man's economy are completely different things. So as you read this week, pay attention to the shift that's going on from what has been done to how we're going to do this now. Thanks for stopping by. Have a good week. Bye-bye.